Good morning. Today we begin the book of Deuteronomy, and I mentioned that it's known as the second law, the second book of the law. And we ended the book of Numbers yesterday with the Israelites on the boundary, ready to move into the land of Canaan, the promised land. And so Deuteronomy now is Moses' final speeches to the people of Israel. And the first few chapters, Moses reflects the journey that they've been on in these 40 years, and some of the things that they did that displeased God, and how God continued to be faithful to them. The second part, the second speech of Moses, is again a reminder and a call. This is a longer one that's in there, and it's just reminding the people to trust God, to be faithful to God, and to rely on God. And then the final one again is just re-emphasizing God's love and His grace and His continued leadership and mercy. And as this book of this second book of the law, it isn't a second law, it isn't new laws, it's just telling the original ones again, and again telling the journey that the people have gone through. And so we're going to spend quite a few days, getting through these, 30 some chapters of Deuteronomy, 34 chapters, but it's not a long time span in here for the people of Israel that this book is. This book of Deuteronomy had a lot of impact on the Jews in the future. It was a call to remind the Jewish people that they were to worship, one place, and that was, why the temple was built in Jerusalem. That was their central place of worship, and that was why the Jewish men especially were basically required to go to Jerusalem at least once during their lifetime for Passover, for the different festivals. It was an expected ritual, and for many families it was an annual journey, and we find that for Jesus and His family, we're told that in the New Testament anyway. But the history that we're going to find in Joshua, Judges, Ruth, the 1st and 2nd Samuel, and the Kings, and all of the next books that follow are really shaped a lot by this book of Deuteronomy, Moses' final addresses to the people of Israel, as I mentioned. So the chat starts out in chapter 1. These are the words that Moses spoke to all of Israel beyond the Jordan, in the wilderness, on the plain opposite, the promised land. And he starts out, reminding them of, it says it's in the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month, Moses spoke to the Israelites. So it's right on the verge of them entering the promised land, with God leading and guiding and, doing the battles for them. But it's this reminder. And then verse 6, the Lord God spoke to us at Horeb, saying, you stayed long enough at this mountain. But it recounts the journeying of the Israelites in their wanderings of the wilderness. Of they spent, they didn't travel every day. We know that. I mean, I remember as a kid thinking, man, how could they just be traveling for 40 days, for 40 years, but they didn't travel all the time. They were in permanent settlements for quite some time. But we know the reasoning for this 40 years was that initial rebellious generation that couldn't quite come to trust and believe in God, in His leadership, without complaining too loudly, had to all pass away, had to all die before the people entered into the promised land. Even Moses, because of his one act of defiance, God says, because of this, you won't enter the land either. But just Joshua and Caleb, the two that were probably quite young, just barely into their 20s, you know, when the Israelites first were set free, or maybe not even quite 20. I don't know how old they were. But Moses goes through and he reminds them of God's promises, of how God led them through the wilderness. And especially, in verse 19 and 20, is when God had said, we've come to the land here now, and I'm going to send spies in there. And, verse 20, I said to you, you have reached the hill country, which the Lord our God is giving us. The Lord has given us the land to you. Go up and take possession as he has promised. Do not fear, do not be dismayed. And so we sent men ahead, or you came to me and said, let's send men ahead, and you were unwilling. Verse 26, but you were unwilling. The people were unwilling to trust God. These spies came back, most of them, 10 of them came back saying, ho, 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 we don't have a chance, forget it. And that didn't sit well with God. We know that. And so this was why, the Israelites would have been in that promised land just not very long into that journey if it hadn't been for their reluctance, their inability, I should probably say, to trust that God would lead them, guide them, and deliver the enemy, the people that lived there. I mean, it's hard to think of them as enemies, but they were the people that possessed the land. And God said, I will drive them out. I will give the land to you. It will no longer be theirs. And so in verse 34 of chapter 1, it's again, Moses is reminding that. The Lord heard your words. He says, not one of these, not one of this evil generation will see the good land that I swore to your ancestors. And I think about that, for us today, for me, for you and me, God's wrath, and I remember being asked to read a part of a sermon to an honors English class, just because of the use of different forms of speech by this pastor. And it was, the title of the sermon was Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. And I mean, it would put the fear of God into you. I mean, it really, to read through that sermon was enlightening in many ways. But, I am so thankful that we aren't worrying that much about the wrath of God, because we preach and teach the grace of God, the mercy of God. And how even though we are undeserving, as one of these Israelites, undeserving of grace and love and forgiveness, God grants that to us. But God's anger was stirred against these people. He had done so much for them, and they just continued to rebel. Anyway, chapter 1 continues that way with Moses talking about the journeys. And chapter 2 begins again after you had stayed at Kadesh. We journeyed back into the wilderness in the direction of the Red Sea. So rather than being right on the verge of moving into the promised land, they're going the wrong way. And we skirted the Mount Seir for many days. And then God said, you've skirted long enough, head north and charge the people, you're about to pass through this land of Esau. But this land I'm not giving you, because I've given that land to the people of Esau. And they come to another land, and this land you may pass through, but this land I have given to Lot's family, and you may not possess it either, So God is setting boundaries for them. And Moses, so this whole book, basically, Moses is reminding the people of how God led them, of how God was faithful to his promises, like here to the family of Esau, to the family of Lot, and all of that. And in verse 16, just as soon as all the warriors had died off from among the people, the Lord spoke to me, today you are going to cross the boundary of Moab. When you approach the frontier, do not harass over it, so I will not give you the land of the Amorites, because, so he's still talking about the people of Lot here. And so it's just that reminder all the way through of how when they got, in verse 26, I sent messages from the wilderness of Kedemoth to King Shihon, If you let me pass through, I will only travel along the road. And you know, the opposition of that king, and how then God said, I'm going to start giving you some possession, you know. So we're going to continue to read these final speeches of Moses, because here we find, as at the end of the book of Numbers, the people are on the verge of the promised land.